If you wouldn't mind taking your seats, that would be fabulous, thank you. I know. I've never seen so many parliamentarians be so shy. Thank you for all coming tonight. I think that was a fantastic way to start the event and we're really pleased. Now, my name's Summer May Finlay. I am a Yorta Yorta woman and I am your moderator tonight. You won't be hearing too much from me, however. We have some fantastic panellists. So just so you know what that video was, it was The Message, The Story from the Shore by filmmakers Alison Page and Nikki Lazarchuk, features descendants of those who witnessed James Cook's passage in 1770. So this film is commissioned by the National Museum of Australia to create a short film in collaboration with Indigenous communities along Australia's east coast. The Message features descendants of those peoples witnessed the passage, as I said before, and is a powerfully reimagining of the Endeavour's arrival, passed up on the coast on the 250th anniversary of the 1770 journey. Before we go any further, I would of course just like to introduce Auntie Anne Weldon, who'll be doing our Welcome to Country. Auntie Anne is from the Metro Local Aboriginal Land Council. So we're really grateful to have her here tonight, welcoming you to this particular event. Thanks, Aunt.
Well, good evening, everyone. Certainly is an honour to be here, and my niece is here in the audience, and of course that this gorgeous young lady who was a lot younger when I first met her, Nat, and that incredible, beautiful, charming Annie, love you. And of course, the distinguished guests and members of Parliament. I do not need to tell you, but we all gathered this evening in the land of the mighty Eora Nation and Gadigal people. And I am a Wiradjuri Koori Balang. And I know that there are other Aboriginal people in this room that belong to other nations throughout Australia and in New South Wales, but I just wanted to say that Wiradjuri is the mightiest nation of Aboriginal nations in this country yet to be disputed. Yeah. I actually grew up in Irambi Aboriginal Reserve in Cowra, New South Wales, and I've shared this with many, many people. When my mother gave birth to me, Renee's grandmother, she gave birth to me in the segregated section of Cowra District Hospital. And at that point in time, we were not even classified as human beings in our own country. We had no rights, we were nothing. And I'm not telling you a lie. We were controlled by the mission manager and the police. And the first time myself and my sister Linda got to actually go into a non-Aboriginal person's home, it was with my dad's best friend, who was a non-Aboriginal man. He was an Italian. And if people know the history of Cowra, there were prisoner of wars, soldiers or people that were actually in Cowra. There was a Japanese where there was a breakout, and there was also Italians. And I dare say that Eddie would have been a descendant. And he worked on the railway with my dad. They were fettlers rather. And he had to give permission for us to go with him to his best friend's home in West Cowra, and that was the first time. And I would have been about, I'd say 6. Linda would have been about 4, and we went to a non-Aboriginal person's home. So it was really an experience. You look back and reflect of where we are today, and I would never have imagined that I would be standing in the corridors of power here this evening to conduct the Welcome to Country, yeah? My ancestral bloodline connects all along the lands and the waters of the Clare, which has been renamed the Lachlan, and the Murrumbidgee rivers. I'm a member of Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council. Some people might think I'm totally insane, but I've been attending meetings at Metro Land Council that stretches far beyond 36 years, but I believe in our local land council and certainly the fact that it is there to represent our people and have a voice. And it is with the permission of Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, who is the cultural authority and custodian of culture, heritage, land and waterways in this part of Eora country. And this evening I certainly bring you a message of respect and caring. And it is important to acknowledge this country's rich first and original story. Firstly, I would like to pay my respects to all elders past and present of all Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples across our country and express my gratitude for the sacrifices that have been made by our elders to create a better quality of life for all peoples in our country. And it is indeed a humble privilege for me to provide a welcome to country. For me, it is a profound honour and a luxury of time that has been given by many warriors that started the traditions for everyone. And a welcome isn't just words. It's a reflection of where we are. Not this modern day structure, but the continuous link of life, lesson, purpose and nurturing supplies. And the boundaries of traditional owners are not defined by the hand and a pen, but through the natural landscape of our incredible continent, our Mother Earth. And the Eora Nation's country spans from the Hawkesbury River to the north, the Nepean to the west and the Georges River to the south. So on behalf of Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, but more importantly with their permission, I welcome everybody to the land of the mighty Eora Nation and Gadigal people. And I acknowledge the Gadigal people whose spirits and ancestors will always remain within their land, our Mother Earth, in this particular part of Eora country. And whenever you travel, and no matter where you live in this incredible country of ours, you exist or you belong to the land of a nation, a tribe and a clan that have existed, and we have existed, that stretches far beyond 65,000 years. First Nations of this land, we are the most diverse, unique and sustainable people on the planet. We are the oldest living culture in the world, and it is important to acknowledge this country's rich first and original history. So let me pay homage to the many warriors that created pathways for all of us, the ones recognised and the ones that you have never heard of. And our journey and milestones will only be realised if we can see, if we can feel, and if we can be a positive difference put into real action. And we must commit to making our world inclusive, breaking through barriers, not creating them. For all of us together can bring about positive changes to multiple generations, starting with the healing of past generations, and by declaring what should not have taken place to our present-day generations, giving them hope. For our creators have shown us a way of creating a better future for the next generation, for everyone in our country. But sadly, the lessons have been learnt at our expense, and our devastation should and must be acknowledged. But to listen, learn, and come together to heal and to prevent heartaches from happening again. So as you connect, learn and share today, tomorrow and beyond, don't live regretting what should have been done, but create the legacy of what must be done. For our future is only as good as our history, and we need to reflect upon the footsteps that each and every one of us are leaving to know where we are heading, shaping a world that we can all be very, very proud of, and the truth needs to be told. But it must be heard if we are to walk together. So join me by learning from the ancient and living teachings of these land's First Peoples, and you can all draw upon my people's spirit as we continue on our journey together. For we believe that our ancestors' spirits walk beside us, guiding us all the way, and we ask that you walk beside us. Please, do not walk ahead of us, and allow my people to share the wealth that our country has to offer. For in doing so, it will allow us to reach our own destinies and create our own pathways. And I say that I certainly continue to pass on my knowledge and stories and the ways of my people. For our forefathers and mothers have ensured that our people's survival through the darkest of times. And let me tell you, we certainly did live through them. And for all the strength and creations and power that we all need is certainly within each and every one of us. I certainly applaud New South Wales Reconciliation Council I feel very honoured, as I said, to actually being asked to actually conduct a welcome at this event. It is a wonderful event. And, I wanted to quote Kay Mundine. I was reading in the Courier Mail today about the National Reconciliation Council have certainly been very, it's been positive outputs with all the reconciliation action plans, that's moving forward. And I wanted to quote her when she said to move from safe to brave actions. And I'd like to think that is the move that, irrespective of whatever persuasion in the corridors of power, be it at a federal or at a state or local level, that's the way that we all need to go. So may my people's spirit walk and guide all of us as we continue on our journey together. And let that journey where we will continue to make our country the best that it is in the world. So once again, welcome to the land of the mighty Eora Nation and Gadigal people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Ariane, for that beautiful welcome. I was sitting there thinking about your words and how this land, and particularly Eora Nation, is something that I have come to respect, and I'm always grateful for the custodians that have looked after it and those that continue. I have worked and lived on this land for 10 years, although I no longer do, and your welcome reminds me of why this land in particular is really special. Although I do have one point of disagreement with you as a Yorta woman and a very small nation that sits just under, I think our mob might have a little, slight disagreement with your characterisation of Wiradjuri, but that's fine. I have lots of Wiradjuri friends and we won't have that conversation now. Before we go any further as well, I'd like to introduce Trevor Khan. He is a New South Wales National and Chair of the Friends of Reconciliation in Parliament group, and he is one of the reasons, or one of the main reasons, we are all here today. So, Trevor, I might hand over to you.
Well, after Auntie Anne's words, I think anything that I say is pretty well irrelevant, so perhaps we should just close up the evening and go. But thank you all for being here. Welcome to what is an extraordinary building with a very, very long history, not all of it good. Hopefully tonight is part of the process of understanding the past, and to that extent it'll be a small part, but nevertheless I hope an important part. We're meeting in somewhat constrained circumstances in the nature of COVID. Even as of Monday, we just wondered what was going to happen in terms of this event. It's been a mildly frustrating week, and poor old Damien, who works for me, has suffered my wrath on a couple of occasions quite unfairly. But in the context of COVID, I thought it was worthwhile, and indeed the inspiration for tonight arose out of what the world, in a sense, has suffered, and in a very small way Australia has experienced in terms of the pandemic. And my mind was taken back in the context of that to some papers that I'd read in the context of me doing my masters at a very old age. And those papers dealt with the very, very early years of the period of colonisation, and particularly to journal entries from April of 1789. And so I'll just read two short entries, and that will be my contribution for this evening. On behalf of myself and also my co-chair, Shaket Musulman. The first is from Midshipman Newton Fowl of HMS Sirius, and his was a letter that he wrote to his father back in England. And he wrote in April 1789, laying dead on the beaches and in the caverns of rocks, forsaken by the rest as soon as the disease is discovered on them. They were generally found with the remains of a small fire on each side of them and some water left within their reach. The Judge Advocate of the colony wrote in his diary David Collins wrote in his diary. At that time, a native was living with us, and on taking him down to the harbour to look for his former companions, those who witnessed his expression and agony can never forget either. He looked anxiously around him in the different coves we visited. Not a vestige on the sand was to be found of human foot. Not a living person was anywhere to be met with. It seemed as if, flying from the contagion, they had left the dead to bury the dead. He lifted up his hands and eyes in silent agony for some time. At last he exclaimed, "All dead, all dead," and then hung his head in mournful silence. Thank you.
Thank you. And have you taken my notes as well? Sorry about that. Thank you. I'm really good on the fly, but I probably do need this a little bit, so thank you. And thank you for those words. It is actually important to think about where we've come from and then reflect on what's changed today, either in the positive or negative. And COVID has changed everybody's lives. We now know how to wash our hands properly, thank you to all of those health education around that. But it also has shown us the vulnerabilities within our economy and our communities. So, and we're going to hear some of the strengths that have come out of COVID today in particular, but also some of the things that probably need to be reflected on in case we ever find ourselves in a situation like this again. So before we go any further, I have been remiss in telling you some housekeeping. As an absolute lover of social media, the first thing I will share with you is the hashtag. If you have your phones out, I'm going to assume you're tweeting. So the hashtag for tonight's event is Rec New South Wales, REC New South Wales. We will be taking some photos through the event. We're hoping that it's okay if we do put those up on social media. If that's not okay, can you please see Kathleen? Put your hand up, Kathleen. And she will make sure that you are not in any photos. And we absolutely appreciate that not everyone loves social media as much as I do. So don't be ashamed if you don't want to be on social media. So, what is Reconciliation in Parliament? Reconciliation in Parliament is a program of events that has been hosted by Reconciliation New South Wales and the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends of Reconciliation Group and held at Parliament House since 2006. The program aims to continue the bipartisan commitment to New South Wales Parliament to reconciliation. Thank you to the Honourable Trevor Khan for hosting us here tonight. It has been a trying week and we appreciate the effort you've gone into, but it really just does demonstrate how wicked COVID in particular can be. So as I mentioned before, Trevor is the co-chair of the Parliamentary Friends of Reconciliation Group alongside the Honourable Sharket Mosamani. I promised I'd try and get his name right because, yes, that's what he was telling me, so I felt that I absolutely needed to. And we want to thank Reconciliation New South Wales for facilitating this year's panel. The Reconciliation in Parliament series has profiled a number of key issues across the years, whether that's youth incarceration, stolen wages, housing, healing and language and culture, treaty agreement and making, which I think is also an ever-present conversation that we need to be having. This year's event, however, will focus on the concepts of truth-telling across our shared history with a look at epidemics and disease, very topical, and what works to improve the socio-cultural determinants of health. And that is something that I think is hugely important as we move forward. You're here because you know this is an opportunity for parliamentarians such as yourself and other key people to actually hear directly from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have the expertise in this space. And I can tell you tonight, you will not be disappointed. So I'd just like to acknowledge elders in the room and other Aboriginal people. We're grateful that you've all come. Opposition Leader, Honourable Jodie McKay, Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, the Honourable Don Harwin, Shadow Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, the Honourable David Harris. And I'd also like to introduce and just thank our co-chairs of Reconciliation New South Wales. We have Annie Tennant here, who is the non-Indigenous co-chair. Unfortunately, Josh Gilbert could not be here, the Indigenous co-chair. But we do actually have with us Tristan Trips Webster, my apologies, who is who is the Executive Director of Reconciliation New South Wales. For those that don't know, Reconciliation New South Wales has been a peak body for reconciliation in New South Wales since 1997. They work to support and educate and inspire the people of New South Wales to engage in reconciliation, to create a reconciled, just and equitable community for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and other Australians in New South Wales. In a time when we're talking about the Uluru Statement, truth-telling, treaty, we need to be making sure that we are moving along the process of reconciliation. It's hugely important. And we're absolutely excited to be at this event, and I'm really excited to be here. And believe it or not, while I've been to Parliament House in Canberra, this is my first time here, and it's fantastic to be in a room, as one of my colleagues described as looking like something out of Harry Potter. And I also want to say that we are streaming this live, so I do want to thank everyone who happens to be streaming, who happens to be online with us. It is amazing how quickly we have gotten used to being online in this day and age with COVID. So, now over to our panellists. As I said, you will not be disappointed. These panellists will be able to share with you some really insightful comments and from their own experiences, both personally and professionally. And I think it's really important that this panel is made up of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We know our communities best, and these guys will absolutely be able to enlighten you on some of the experiences of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, particularly during COVID. So our first panellist is Megan Williams, and if she'd like to join us up here on the panel. Meg is a Wiradjuri woman who's worked for 2 decades to advocate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's knowledge and needs in program design, evaluation, research, ethics, and university curriculum, especially to improve health services for for people in prison and post-release. She is the chair of the Justice, Health and Forensic Mental Health Network Human Research Ethics Committee, member of the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare National Prisoner Health Information Committee, member of the Corrective Services of New South Wales Aboriginal Advisory Council, and when in her spare time, because clearly she has so much of it, is an associate editor of the Health Sociology Review. Meg and I have done some work together, and I have to say I absolutely value Meg's contribution to this space. She is the lead researcher at the University of Sydney's National Centre for Cultural Competence and a member of the Sydney Institute of Criminology, working with multiple community and government partners on grants about prisoner health. Next up, we have Peter Malouf. Peter is the Executive Director of Operations at the Aboriginal Health and Medical Research Council for New South Wales and holds an honorary associate professor position at Sydney Medical School, University of Sydney. He is a Waka Waka and Wali Wali public health researcher, is an experienced health system executive with experience in applied research and evaluation focusing on health service delivery, primary and mental health care in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. He works with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in responding to natural disasters and health planning, and to support community consultation and engagement through health service design. And of course, up next is Robert Cooley. Robert is from La Perouse on the northern tip of Botany Bay. He has a strong connection to the area on his mother's side, as well as a strong connection to the New South Wales South Coast through his father's family. He's employed by the La Perouse Local Aboriginal Land Council as a senior ranger on the Gamay Rangers, an Indigenous ranger team under the Commonwealth Government's Indigenous Land and Sea Rangers program. There are about 120 different rangers program around the country, but Gamay Rangers are the only big city amongst them, so he's going to have some valuable insights to share tonight. They undertake natural and cultural resource management, activities on cultural areas within Botany Bay. They patrol the waters of Botany Bay, marine mammal awareness and protection work, cultural heritage and conservation, threatened species and cultural and environmental awareness for recreational vessel operators and visitors. So as you can see, each and every one of these panellists absolutely deserve to be here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from them. So I am going to go join them down there, and we can start having a chat. So the way this is going to work, I'm going to just kind of have a facilitated conversation around the topic, and then we can open it up to questions. And I'm assuming none of you are shy, so we're expecting quite a few questions. And I know we can talk, so I need my timer, otherwise we will go well over time. I might start with you, if that's okay.
Oh.
Yep. So you work at the AHNMRC, which gives a bit a state perspective. So how has COVID in particular impacted the New South Wales community more generally?
In relation to Aboriginal communities? Yeah. Look, I think first of all, we should acknowledge the fact that there has been traditional practices that has influenced communities to be really responsive to the COVID pandemic, which then has translated to our Aboriginal community-controlled health services being, lead agents in terms of the response. And also working with community around preparedness of the response. And so what we have seen over the last 12 months is that communities have been working really closely with the New South Wales Ministry around, the public health measures that are in place, and working more broadly about how to, and again, what you mentioned before about kind of social and cultural determinants, about how to maintain that within a space of a pandemic. And so I think, more generally, communities have, embraced the public health measures. They've, when there are cases in communities, they know when to lock communities down. They know how to maintain cultural continuity in terms of their practices through, various forms of, whether it's, virtually and connectingness. So I think, as a community, we've certainly done really well. And again, getting back to that notion around traditional practices, and I get back to this point to the fact that, in April 1789, when we had, a pandemic around smallpox, kind of from Port Macquarie all the way down the south coast, that had impacted populations. We had seen Aboriginal communities deal with that in a way that we're currently dealing with it. And it's about, distancing themselves, Aboriginal cultural groups, moved inland to protect themselves from the disease. And so, again, those cultural practices exist today in terms of how communities have maintained the low numbers of COVID. Yeah.
Robert, Peter just talked about cultural continuity, and I know that obviously through the Ranger program, that's a large part of what you have been doing. Can you talk to us about what your program was doing during COVID?
Look, I guess during COVID, like most communities, we sort of looked at each other, at ourselves, and thought, well, what can we do? And after that initial, we never ever panicked, but obviously we had those concerns, and we do have vulnerable elders who live alone, and they're relying on our community organisations and people to assist them just to go about doing simple things like getting food. So look, I was fortunate with my ranger program. All of us are saltwater people, lived around the ocean. The ocean is provided for our families, so the first thing that come to my mind, particularly with the panic in supermarkets and things, well, after the toilet rolls, the meat was the next thing to run dry. So for my ranger program, I initially went to my CEO and said, look, I think we can do something here. We're all fishermen, we've got our boat, we've got the thing, we're all competent. How about we just go out and get some fish and take it to our vulnerable elders, deliver it to their door. And with that, within a week, companies like Harris Farm come on board and said, hey, we heard what you're doing. I think we can help by adding to your fish and that you're providing your community veggie packs, fruit and veggie packs. And then IGA heard about it, come on board and said, hey, I think we can help too. We can add to those packs by providing things like toilet roll and essentials and all that kind of stuff. So, and we're kind of lucky in the fact that that onset of COVID coincided with our mullet run season, which is a significant cultural event in our community. And although it was a little bit tricky dealing with the authorities and negotiating that permit, and I believe we're the only permit given, because we saw it as an essential service to our community. So that provided that ranger team was a perfect resource to be able to do that, albeit with a few different safeguards in place. Normally if we have a mullet run, the whole community will run over the hill to the beach. We kind of had to talk to the community and say, look, we're going to have to change things a little bit. My ranger team will run the mullet event, and it was highly successful. And I think eventually we provided around 2,000 meals for our community over that period, which is enormous. And so we're quite lucky that it coincided, that initial really hard period coincided with the mullet run, which is enormous. So each day I'd task my rangers out, whether it be diving for crabs or abalone, lobster, and we always had that readily available mullet supplies there. So that was a really good resource for that, and got our community through a little bit hard patch, not only providing food, but traditionally that event was the happiest time of our community. It brought everybody together, and it was a really happy time for our community. So it was more than just food. It was about providing something good during that really dark time, and so it was really helpful or useful, with mental health and well-being for some of our community who would, like I said, some of our elders lived alone. They just didn't have no family or anybody that could do that, and were cleaning and delivering fish and veggie packs to their doors every day. So it was, without that range of resource, we might have struggled a little bit. So I think it was quite handy to have that on board there. So it was really good. And I think my young rangers who were all between the ages of 16 and 24. I think it was a really eye-opener for them, and for most of them, it was a first for them, and I think that gave them a really, strong sense of empowerment and worth, and they really felt really proud of themselves, I think. And at the end of it, we looked back and we thought, wow, we've done a really good thing here. And I think I was really proud of them and our community and our land council for firstly allowing me to do it. And so look, it was a really good thing for us, I think.
Fantastic. That one thing of going out fishing allowed by a permit had so many, just listening to you, so many important factors. Helped people maintain health and well-being, mental health, continued cultural practice. It's just a phenomenal thing to think that during a difficult time, one thing of just going out fishing with your rangers actually has brought so much to the community. Meg, so, Robert was just talking about some of the vulnerable members of the community, such as the elders. This particular program was able to support, particularly because otherwise they'd be isolated. Can you talk to me a little bit about some of the people that were incarcerated during this time? Because this is a lot of the work that you do, because they're obviously quite vulnerable to COVID and also being incarcerated.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's amazing, Robert, to hear about wellness and well-being coming from that time, because it's just been horrendous in the criminal justice system. I think, one of the darkest times and incredibly worrying. Even though we have managed to not have COVID race through prisons in Australia like other parts of the world, the US, Australia's had on the one hand, an extremely good response to prevent that. But on the other hand, it's been because prisoners have been in lockdown and have been isolated. And, I've not known of an injection of funds into prisons to provide the extra mental health and wellbeing support that's been, really required. It's a no-brainer. If people are going to be isolated, who already often have mental health issues, already isolated from family and country, already had complicated legal issues, to then be locked up. I mean, think about it for yourselves. Could you survive that sort of 2 weeks in quarantine on your own? We'd whinge about that, let alone being in, and it's that same country. I think that's what gets me is, I think I only went to Long Bay Jail one time during the pandemic and during that period of 2020. And, it was just so rattling. I really did remember every time I go there, and I go there as a visitor, as well as a professional. And like the professional door I go through, I can see the other door that I go through, and that's jarring in itself. But to also know that First Fleet, that ship was right there. This is a point of first contact. This is a point I always think about, smallpox and people dying right there, and then also people dying in that prison, in the forensic hospital. I've worked on cases that, people die right there. So that the risk to me of extremely poor health and wellbeing when people exit after being in isolation during the pandemic, it's a horror show. So blessings to you. Gee, I wish we had many more programs that we could connect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are locked up. All of our families are touched by it. Everybody tends to come out okay for a little while, and then just the layers of issues come up for people and damage families economically, damage our sense of ourselves over generations too. So we urgently need some attention to healthcare in prisons.
COVID's definitely highlighted that. Peter, you were talking about the low numbers of COVID amongst Aboriginal people across the country, but also in New South Wales. I think last time I checked, it was about 0.6% of the COVID cases are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. We make up 3% of the population, and there was an expectation, given the high rates of chronic disease, or NCDs, amongst our mob, that we would actually end up being overrepresented rather than underrepresented in the data. Can you share with us, and I'm going to open this question up to both of you as well, but Peter, could you start just kind of sharing why you think we've actually been so successful as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities at keeping those numbers low?
Yeah, I think it's the fact that the strength that we have in the health system is really targeted towards our Aboriginal community-controlled health organisations. There's 47 members across New South Wales who have responded really well to the pandemic in terms of preparedness and responses, and managing, the chronic condition of management of Aboriginal people in community. That notion around, wellbeing checks that happens, and majority of that happens through our Aboriginal community-controlled health organisations. And again, that program is under-resourced, but we know that this is a need in community, and that's the reason why I think by that level of connection around understanding wellbeing of patients that have got chronic conditions are able to, obviously navigate through this pandemic of COVID. But I think also too about our workforce. We have strong and deadly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health professionals that are working in the community-controlled health space who understand how to provide culturally responsive care to our communities and understand the risk that COVID could have in communities. And I think that's the reason why we've done so well in terms of having those low numbers.
And, we know that the Aboriginal community-controlled health sector has come from need. So the first AMS just down the road here in Redfern, 1971, and I think some of the learnings that our ACCHOs have been able to take on has been the successive pandemics, but other health issues, and also obviously they were established because of the racism that was experienced by Aboriginal people, and still Aboriginal people continue to experience in the mainstream setting. Robert, why do you think that we've had such low cases here?
Oh, look apart from the obvious, the support network within the various health services, I think one of the big things that we done was got on the front foot straight away. Firstly, we took it serious. Second thing we done was closed our community off, and got out through networks like social media and that. What we're doing, where the various things that we could offer as services, and even that mullet thing, getting it out. Okay, look. But I think first we took it serious, and personally been, in that vulnerable bracket of being over 50 and being Aboriginal. I took it serious with my young rangers as well, given they're quite social young guys. But I think that was just a small example of the whole community, and I think we got on the front foot. We reached out to various companies and agencies and, for help, and we weren't shy in asking for help, and we weren't also shy in putting our message out there that, hey, we are taking this thing serious, and our community is closed, and our community sits on the shores of the northern side of Botany Bay. If anyone's been out there on a weekend around the La Perouse, Little Bay, Malibu area, it's very busy. Even in that time, people come out the beaches and the cafes and that. So it's very busy, and it wasn't always easy to maintain that security of the reserve out there, but we did, because we took it serious and we got on the front foot. So I think, for me personally, I think that's why we were really successful, and I don't know anyone connected with the community has had any issues with it. So I think that's a pretty good result so far.
That's a fantastic result.
And I think the other thing too to note is that, through this, and again, I'm from Queensland, so don't hold it against me, but in New South Wales, the community controlled and community were really working together and were collaborating and sharing resources. So if, one community had limited resources, then they would reach out to another community nearby to share resources and through this pandemic. So I think, that sense of community connectedness and resilience really demonstrated throughout.
And just, Robert, to pick up on the front foot comment that you've made, we know that the AHMRC Pandemic Toolkit came out early in March, either just before or around the same time the WHO actually called it a pandemic, so the ACHO sector was. And also picking up on your point, it's largely because of our connectivity. So when we think about the socio-cultural factors, our connectivity as communities and our understanding of our communities are actually a strength and allow us to make sure that our communities are safe. And Meg, from your perspective, what do you think some of the strengths are and the reasons we've done so well?
Well, that the fellas have talked about, but also I often go back to Katrina Alford's work, an economist who's studied the effectiveness of NACCHO and the member organisations, and it's clear as anything that more services for a cheaper price. I mean, who wouldn't want to get behind that? As well as the cultural connections, the creativity, the front foot, the leading in the world. I mean, why we don't get behind those more. But for me, it's just absolutely gutting to hear that these successes go on, and while COVID hasn't spread in prisons, that wasn't because community-controlled health organisations were in there. They are essentially locked out of our prisons. And, it's been the driver for me in everything I do is to try to wedge those prison doors open so that those member services may be able to get in and deliver the effective, timely care that they can. But because they're often funded, requiring Medicare rebates, fee-for-service, and are Commonwealth funded, and prisons are state funded, states don't really have great buckets of funds for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. We do not achieve the Nelson Mandela Guidelines of the United Nations, which says that people in prison have the right to the equivalent care in prison as they do in the community. So we do not achieve that because those organisations cannot get into prisons unless it comes out of your own pocket. It comes at a cost to the Aboriginal community-controlled health sector. So we have people in prisons who would not have gotten their 715s during that time, the health checks, let alone social and emotional wellbeing programs, let alone healing programs that they could have accessed in the community. And we also know that prison health services were overwhelmed. This Parliament knows it had a report delivered to it about prison health services only a few weeks ago that showed extremely overwhelmed and underfunded with needs. So I think we've got a solution sitting right in front of us if only the Commonwealth and the state could agree on a mechanism. It's all it would take, an agreement on a mechanism to fund ACCHOs, a special pilot program, even for, say, 2 years and evaluated well, so that we could demonstrate that we can come to those intergovernmental relationships and that we need not have them separated. And that sheer buck passing and hot potato passing, we heard it from Wyatt even weeks ago. No, that's a state issue. And the closing the gap target only says we're going to reduce imprisonment rates. It says nothing about improving prisoner health and wellbeing, and it says nothing about doing that through the best quality care that we've got research that backs it up. So it just doesn't add up to me.
And we know that there are ACCHOs that have run programs in prisons and done successfully, but they tend not to be long-term and sustainable because of the lack of funding.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we've heard a little bit, and I have some more questions for these guys. I could talk about this forever. It's something that I'm very passionate about, but I just want to open up to the floor. Does anyone have any questions? Or would you like me to keep asking them? Come on, someone has to have a question.
You've rattled.
Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it. I have the luxury of pen and paper, so I get to write mine down. So, I just wanted you to stop and think about and reflect on some of the passages that Trevor shared during his presentation, thinking about the impact of the health epidemics on, of previous health epidemics, probably some of the things from COVID as well. But what do you think the impact of these health epidemics are on cultural knowledge and protection of country? And I'll let you guys decide who goes first. Maybe Robert? Yeah.
Thank you. Look, I think for the impacts for us being in Botany Bay, we're the first peoples, to suffer from the impacts, disease and dispossession, and only recently now they've got an exhibition, or just currently they've got an exhibition of spears that were taken from our people on that first contact. Only just returned to Australia now. I mean, when I do walks and talks, although it is what it is now, and we're living in 2021, if you look back at that, and in today's sort of world, we can say, well, imagine if someone took your ability away, to your capacity to go to a supermarket and buy food. 40 spears, the work back then to just put into making those spears and to be taken on in a moment just as a souvenir. And so, look, I think that even now I'm one of my roles first as a National Parks field officer, and now as a ranger was the repatriation of the remains of our people that were taken many years ago. And as recently as 2 days before last Christmas, I repatriated the remains of 3 of our people that were taken many years ago that were sitting in shoeboxes in a museum. That were, and I've been involved now, and I think my latest figure was around 350 repatriations of people that were taken from around our area, and I've also assisted Metro Land Council in repatriation of the remains of their people as well, over at North Head and around Sydney Harbour, and so I think that's just a really stark reminder of, hey, I know all those people repatriated weren't always, left this world in sinister circumstances. But as the city's been expanding, and like Auntie Anne said, welcome, the Mother Earth, Earth's our mother, and although the landscape's changed dramatically to what it was then, what's under that concrete and that steel is still the same to us. Yeah. And we know that there's still some of our people, in that land. And so for us, that disconnection, and one of the big things for us was language, was taken away from us. Our community was removed from La Perouse for the early, so that government could control them, and only moved back in the 1880s, because as the city expanded, our people living on the shores of Sydney Harbour was a bad look for some of the more influential people that were starting to live around there. So, they moved our people, rounded our people up with connections to our area, documented connections and moved them back there. And even now we have some people refer to us as a discrete Aboriginal community, which we don't really like, because we're not a discrete Aboriginal community. We're a thriving Aboriginal community where culture is rich. And the good thing about my Ranger program, I get to share that and tell some of those stories to people who know. And look, only a matter of a month ago, I was in here doing a talk to a corporate group. I think it was DHL law firm. And I was telling some of our stories, and quite a few of the younger ones got really emotional and said, look, I apologise for my ignorance. And I said, look, I don't think it's ignorance. Don't be too hard on yourself. We live in a big bag city and we're just trying to do the best and survive like everybody else. But we're just here to remind you, hey, that we're still here, despite everything that's happened. And our culture is still rich, and we're just here to share some of that with you. So, yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, look, I think the other impact, I guess, COVID's had on particularly cultural practices is those who have passed away. And particularly for my personal experience, not being able to go back home and actually, bury an auntie and go through that process, the ceremony, was quite, traumatic for me. And I think, those kind of scenarios have certainly impacted the way that we now practice culture when there's public health measures that are in place. And I think, that kind of disconnect and not being able to be a part of that ceremony has really impacted me still, because I'm still grieving. Because I can't go back and actually go through process. And so that's been something I think, there's commonalities in terms of, other mob here in New South Wales have probably experienced the same. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd extend that, to people in prison in those lockdowns and extended periods of isolation and not being able to move out of the prison to go to anything. And while there were some quick increases in audiovisual links, I'd say it wasn't enough in this day and age with the types of technologies we do have at our fingertips. So, that sheer disruption to family relationships too. And it does, ring true from the past as well when people, were dying either from illnesses or lack of access to healthcare, being forgotten. Those stories in our families of people trying to get healthcare but not getting it on time or effectively too. And to think about, George Floyd's death during the pandemic, when we're all at home with that much more access to our screens, and the I can't breathe, and how that ran through us because we knew of that from our own state with David Dungay Jr. and that video being online and highly accessible, really traumatic. So then for all those other families that have had deaths in custody since, it's just, I think, for the families, layer upon layer of trauma and the remembering of the traumas of the past that come up, and very few opportunities to grieve, like you said. It's just, I am so proud of how strong Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are to live within that complexity. And a lot of that is because of what, that rich culture that's been passed down to us, that we belong to this country and we're deferential to this country, and country always has answers for us. So without that, you just absolutely grieve. Even families going through coroner's court during this time, very little support. Really dehumanising process in itself. So, thank goodness we do have, your examples particularly, and the Aboriginal community-controlled health sector. Where would we have been if we did see an over-representation of COVID in our communities? I mean, the terror that we lived with as well, really, I think, kept us on our toes too.
We know that other Indigenous communities around the world have not fared like we have. And I think that is a testament to our resilience, but also the systems and structures like the ACCHO sector. So I we're going to eat probably a little bit into your mingling time, but I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions. I have given you a few minutes, yes.
Ask Robert, perhaps, on communication.
Oh, look, our community is close related to the Wreck Bay community on the New South Wales South Coast. Their circumstances were similar, although their community is a little bit more isolated and a lot more easy to control than ours. But they'd pretty much done the same things. You know, they were going fishing for their community. They live right on the ocean like we do. And yeah, so look, I think there was similar, very similar situation to us and how they reacted. And we, like I said, we have a lot of family connections between the two communities. So it wasn't surprising that that's the ocean is one of the first place we look to help us, for obviously food source, but not only just a place as a refuge to get away from everything. I don't know anybody who's been affected by the COVID-19 virus, but I do know a couple of people who have been affected by mental health issues, and even as a hangover from that COVID, I lost a friend a couple of days ago from the hangover effects from the mental health issues he was suffering throughout that period. You know, it took its toll. You know, even now, you know, a little over a year over the first onset of the really heavy stages. So look, there has been impacts on that way, but to answer your question about the actual virus, I've not known anybody affected by it.
Got a question down the front here, and then I'll come to you.
Well, I suppose
Yeah, look, I think, you know, if we take the prisons, for example, so we're going to see a new trend of intergenerational trauma, right? Because we haven't invested time or support in the prisons to be able to support inmates. And particularly for young people that are in juvenile justice, you know, they have access in detention and watching TV and watching the events that unfold. And so that's traumatic experience for them. And so now they're going to come back into community and they're going to be traumatised. But we have to think about how do we develop support systems when they transition back. You know, we know that, you know, we have to reconnect kids back with family. You know, what are our family unification programs that are culturally appropriate, that are connecting kids back? You know, we have overrepresentation of out-of-home care of Aboriginal young kids. You know, are we going to see more overrepresentation in that space? And so I think, you know, we need to be sitting down and having a serious conversation about, you know, those vital and fundamental support systems, working with community controlled health sector to co-design appropriate response for the transition of inmates that are coming out and for young people coming out into community.
Just conscious of time, do you have a quick response before we go to the next question?
No, I just wholeheartedly agree, and it's just a decision that humans can make, and how profound it is that humans won't make that decision to care for our most vulnerable, who, with their impacts across generations to come, we are digging ourselves in for worse if we don't act seriously.
And I think the thing to note here is that I think now we're in this kind of, I think we're probably at the end now of the pandemic, but I think it's now to start thinking about lessons learned, what we've learnt in this space, because we know that, you know, we're going to face more pandemics in the future, and that's because of the fact that there's poor town planning that destroys country and the ecosystem that exists. And when you destroy construct environments, there's going to be new pathogens, new disease that's going to develop. And so we have to be ready. We have to think about what are our responses in terms of looking after Aboriginal people in community that are isolated, that are wanting to be connected to culture and their practices. So I think, it's the time now to reflect and to look at those lessons learned.
Yep, and I think New South Wales doesn't have health considerations in its town planning, which is an oversight and a disappointment is the way I'd phrase it. Lucky last question, unless you've got a burning question and you're happy to sit here for a little while.
It's probably a public way. And also your medical view.
Well, for me, in terms of prisons, watching colleagues who are prison health staff, absolutely run off their feet, understaffed, working hard, full of fear about all of the other things they're not able to attend to because they've diverted their relatively small workforce compared to need onto the vaccination programs. So this is that problem shifting. We're focused here and what else is going on over here.
That's injustice health.
Injustice health, yeah.
I'm going to ask for quick responses from Peter and Robert, just because...
Look, I guess in terms of vaccination rollout of COVID-19, I think what we've seen is, the Aboriginal community-controlled health sector actually do this quite well and are equipped and able to do this. They do it for many years in terms of the immunisation vaccine rollout. And I think the other thing to note is that just in recent months, we've seen legislation changed for Aboriginal health practitioners to now vaccinate Aboriginal populations. So I think that's a good win for us moving forward.
Absolutely.
Oh, look, I guess one thing our community is fortunate to have is a medical centre on our land council property, which is less than 100 metres from our reserve. So with the help of social media, getting that information out there and, the land council. So I think it's going really, really well at the moment. So we're kind of lucky in that way.
Yep, fantastic. I mean, I think the story that I'm hearing tonight is of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander strength during crises. It is about our resilience as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It is about our ability to just get on and do the job, if I steal some words from our Prime Minister, and do it quickly and do it well, and to protect our communities, largely because, as these guys demonstrate, we know our communities best. So I also heard that we need support to continue doing that, both with the fallout of COVID, but also just generally improving Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health, which is why events like this are so important. And I think the other thing is that this is a position and a privilege to be able to listen to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people share their both personal and professional insights. So thank you to our panellists. It has been fabulous. I know I could sit here talking to you for quite a while about this topic. I am going to offer that you may want to speak to both outside of this particular session, but also continue this conversation after this event. I'm confident that each and every one are passionate about the work that they do and would welcome you continuing this conversation. And also, just before we close, there is a Parliamentary Aboriginal Liaison Officer, which is brand new. If you haven't already met Steve Collins, you absolutely should. Having a new position is a great opportunity for MPs to engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community on policies which impact them and also the processes. So I want to thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for allowing us to steal some of your mingling time. And we really, really hope, a little plug, and it's blatant, I'll put it out there, that we hope that you join Reconciliation New South Wales as a member. It's easy to do. Go online. Happy for you to do it right now if that's what you want to do. And it's a really good way to keep up to date on all of the events in New South Wales that relate to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and a good way of celebrating National Reconciliation Week. So thank you. And just before our panellists go, we have a little gift. The gift is from Yamananga online store in Moree. They support the ethical sale of Aboriginal art which is really important. So let me just get those gifts, and then you are happy to leave and have a drink and get some nibblies. Right, thank you.
Great to hear.